Hey everybody! Thank you very much for coming. I am Michael Paulson. I am the Austin chapter head for Products Account. Really appreciate everyone being with us on this beautiful, beautiful spring evening, and can tell who's dedicated to product and meeting good people and hearing a good story. In my day job, I am the chief product officer at a company called Jungle Scout downtown. I do this out of passion. I love coming here once a month and learning from somebody who's had a different experience than I've had. And tonight's speaker is a great example of that. Before we get going, two things I want to say. One, before I forget, we have a survey at the end of this. As all of you know, working in product, it's really, really important to get customer feedback, and we take that very seriously. So it's really quick. I would love to ask each and every one of you to fill out the survey. Tell us what you thought about the event, about the speaker and the talk. So thank you for doing that. I also want to say thank you to the Indeed team. These guys are amazing. They always do such a good job of hosting us. The food, the AV support, the hospitality, logistics is really fantastic, and they do all the hard work, and I really, really appreciate the Indeed team. So I actually want to bring up one of those folks right now. Courtney Tulig is a senior product manager in Indeed Family, and I'd like to invite Courtney to come up and tell us a little bit about what you guys are doing.
Sure. All right, thank you. So I work on a product called Indeed Family. We're a part of Indeed's incubator organization. Incubator explores kind of experimental and innovative ideas for Indeed. We often start off with sort of 3-month funding periods where we have a short time frame to quickly ship an MVP and try out the idea. My team, called Indeed Family, helps connect parents with babysitters and nannies. We're only in Texas right now for our beta. We've been active for about a year. So we've grown from just the Austin area to Texas-wide. We have a really simple platform that makes it easy for parents to come on, post a job in the child care space, connect with their applicants, and chat with them all within our platform. So this is kind of an exploration for Indeed to explore the care workspace. We're not in the elder care or pet care spaces yet, but it's an easy transition into those things as well as other areas. So that's what I'm working on, and there are open roles on our team. So if anyone's interested, I know we're interviewing for some of those, and Indeed.jobs is the place to find those opportunities. So I'll hand it back to you. And we're recording. That was like my one thing I had to say. We're recording.
So that's why we're using mics in a room this size. So, Courtney, thank you very much. It sounds like you guys are working on some really cool stuff. Thanks. All right, so our agenda tonight is actually pretty straightforward. In a moment, I'm going to invite up and introduce our speaker. At the end of that, we'll do a Q&A. I'm actually personally really excited for the smaller format tonight because I think it's going to allow us to have a good discussion and kind of make this more conversational. And I know from my time talking to Sushma that there's an awful lot of interesting experience she has that's actually not in the talk. So I'll try to like tease that a little bit and then see if we can get into it. At the end, after we're done with the Q&A part, one of the benefits of coming here is it's a great way to connect with the product community and kind of tell people what you're up to. So I will invite people at the end of that to come up for shout-outs, which is, we're hiring, looking for a co-founder, I'm raising money, anything that you feel like is relevant to this audience. We'll just take a couple of minutes. You come on up, you get 10 seconds to make your best pitch, and thanks. So getting on to the talk, just a little bit about Products Account, right? Products Account is a network of product managers and product professionals who want to get together with other people who are kind of dedicated, like serious about the craft. Our thing is bringing in very experienced product executives who've kind of been there and done that, talking to a group of people who have also been in the space, are pretty experienced. For me, one of the things I want to get done with this chapter here in Austin is bring a real diversity of experience, industries, point of views, ways of working, and to me that's really exciting. I feel like we can all only have so many experiences personally in our career, so one of the ways you level up is by hearing other people's experiences and hopefully walk away with a new insight and thinking about your job differently, and also maybe having met some cool people here tonight. So the organization, too, I want to say, it's been around since 2014. It was founded by a woman named S.C. Moati, and we're in about 5 cities now. Austin is our newest chapter, so you guys are still in on the ground floor. On to the talk, right? So I'm really excited about tonight's talk, which fits perfectly in kind of my vision for diversity. And to have somebody here who's now worked in like 2 different like food industries is actually really exciting and really different for me. So that's pretty cool. I always find Sushma Zoellner, our speaker tonight, has been in the tech space for about 15 years. I always find it pretty fascinating thinking about how people got into product management. There's some pretty interesting stories here. In her case, she actually almost didn't. I think she was fully on track to become a brain surgeon and had done all the prerequisites at UT before making a U-turn and deciding that tech seemed like a lot more interesting. So I think lucky for us probably that she did, because then she's here to tell us about it tonight. She has spent about 6 years at IBM, then done stints in e-learning, e-commerce, Daily Deals, remember those? And now 2 different food-related companies, Snap Kitchen, Yum, and HEB now, right? So you have a BS in computer science from UT, an MS in tech commercialization from UT Austin, and just last week completed an executive education program at Harvard Business School. So really, really cool. She is also a celebrated amateur crime fighter. And I thought about telling the story, but I decided to let you tell it later. I will just tease it up and just say it involves her nailing some criminals using a BlackBerry. So, wow. So really, really interested to hear that story later. Sushma is married, has 2 kids, and unlike our last 3 speakers, has actually been here for about 20 years. So, yay, if not a native, that at least makes you a local, and that's super cool. Thank you for being with us here tonight. Can we please invite Sushma Zoellner to the stage? Thank you.
Thank you for that intro. Please bear with me. I was sick last week, so if I cough and it's annoying, I'm sorry. Today I wanted to talk to you guys about a new space that I've been really immersed in over the last 4 years or so. I'm guessing many of you have worked at more technology-focused companies, but for the past 4 years, I've been working at food companies. And I thought it would be interesting for me to share my experiences with you guys, so you have a better understanding of how it's like to work at a company where the product isn't technology. And what are some of the considerations as you go through thinking about fulfilling on the customer experience when a lot of the experience is actually not in your control? And how do you sort of like mitigate the risk around that? So a lot of this is going to be covering some of that, but please feel free to ask questions throughout, and I'll be asking you tons to fill in some of the gaps. So the first question I have for you guys is, how many of you have been product managers on products that are technology? I'm assuming everybody in this room. Yeah, for the most part. And so what do you do when something doesn't go wrong, or what are some of the things that could potentially go wrong in your space? Like servers go down. There's a... you have customers that want features, but you don't have those features available in the product. Yep. Nobody thought about that before launching the product market. Yep. Yeah. Nobody told you about new features you wanted to put into the product that you didn't account for. That's right. Bugs happen all the time. And so when you encounter those issues, what do you typically do? You go and talk to the engineers, you talk to design if it's a user experience issue, and you figure out a plan of action, you put together a solution, and you release it out to those customers. Typically, you don't even have to leave your desk for a lot of these situations, right? How many of you have been a product manager on a product where the product was not technology? Anybody? Ever in your career? Yeah? Was that? Yeah.
So like in a sense, we still have technology, but I'm realizing more and more working in this space that part of our product is the quality of person that goes to your house.
Yeah, absolutely. So in your case, the product is a person. Anybody else? All right, fresh crowd. All right, so I get to tell you everything I know about this space. So I'm sure many of you have ordered food. That's probably something that's true across this group. This is a really rudimentary customer journey that I put together, but it kind of goes through the basic emotional journey that somebody goes through when they're placing an order for food. First, you're somewhat happy about looking through a menu and figuring out, oh, what delicious things can I eat for today? When you place your order, you're not super excited because it might be kind of expensive, especially if you use a delivery service. It might be more expensive than you were hoping for. The hard part is the wait. You're probably already hungry when you place that order, and now you're waiting for that food to show up. You're pretty happy when it gets there, but you're the most happy when it's in your mouth and you're eating that food. And that's the typical customer journey for most experiences when you're ordering for food. But when you're comparing this experience, you're comparing it to other situations in which people are making food for you, like at a restaurant. If you're in a restaurant, you sit down to eat, you're making a selection of the menu, the chefs are preparing those meals, and they're delivering it to you. There's not a whole lot that could go wrong in that experience, but there are some things that could go wrong. They might have sold the last steak in the house, and so they'll come out to you and say, hey, sorry, we just sold the last steak. Is there something else you would like to eat? Well, that turnaround time and getting that feedback and actually delivering on the promise, they probably still made you pretty happy with whatever you decided to choose off of the menu. But all of that is within the control of a restaurant. Similarly with takeout, there's a lot of parts to the journey, but a lot fewer. But when you actually make the food yourself, there's even more parts of the journey. And that's what I kind of want to dig into. So when something goes wrong in that customer journey I just spoke through, what happens? Babies are crying. Babies are crying. They're hangry. People are hungry. I mean, there's been occasions, I'm sure you've had some, where you place an order for food, the food shows up at your door, somebody didn't get their food, and now one person in the group doesn't get dinner. Or they made it the wrong way, and you don't eat steak, and so now there's an extra meal there that you can't consume because you have some sort of dietary restriction. And then, of course, it comes late. It came 2 hours later than you're expecting. You're even more hungry than when you were. It's cold. All of these things. Food is very personal for us, and it's very subjective in how you taste the food and how you think it's good or not. And so there's a lot of things that are going on within your brain that make a decision on if this was a good experience or not. So how do you recreate that experience in a consistent way over and over again for all of your customers? So this is the part of the journey that you may not be familiar with. This is sort of a high-level view of what the food journey was like when I worked at Snap Kitchen, but this really applies to a lot of places where they prepare meals for you. So I'll sort of start at the beginning here with demand planning. Does anybody know what demand planning is, or has it been, yeah? Oh, yeah.
So basically, you have to plan for the future demand. You have to create a forecast. You have to have a supply chain ready to support the demand, and all involves also human resources planning and everything that is involved with the chain.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's basically figuring out, okay, next Wednesday, how many people are going to eat this dish? That's kind of a hard thing to figure out if you really think about it. And you have to do that for every dish that you're selling. And what if it's a new dish and nobody has ever tried it before? You don't know if they'll like it or not. And so how do you actually come up with what is that magic number to make sure that every customer who wants that meal gets it, and that you don't order too much so you don't have to throw away a bunch of food or give it away to a food bank? So demand planning is one of the hardest things that a company that is in this space has to do, because they want to eliminate shrink, which is basically food that they have to waste, but make sure that they fill on the customer promise, which is making sure that we have the food available for them. And that demand planning isn't necessarily thought of at the meal level, it's thought of at the ingredient level. So when you're thinking about all these dishes that you're making, you're thinking about all the different ingredients that you need to source and how much of that. And then when you think about that, it's not how much you need in raw form, but how much does that actually cook down to make that meal. So it's a bunch of calculations that you have to make in order to figure out what is this magic number. And typically it is a black box. There's a lot of math that goes into this, and a lot of different ways that companies tries to solve for this. But that's a key part of the equation. Procurement is basically, when you go out and you source all the ingredients that you need. And a company like Snap Kitchen, that was really important to us. We wanted to make sure the farms that we worked with, the ingredients that we used were really high quality, not necessarily organic, but we knew where this food was coming from, because putting all of these really great ingredients together creates a really great product. But there's a lot of things that can happen with procurement, especially if you don't have a direct relationship with these farms. This is actually a carrot farm. In case you couldn't guess, I'm going to go talk through carrots. But this is a carrot farm, but you may not have a direct relationship with a carrot farm. You may have a relationship with a company that aggregates a bunch of these relationships. And so you basically say, hey, I need 600 pounds of carrots, this type of carrot. Oh, well, we don't sell that carrot. So you're going to have to pick from the carrots that we sell. Okay, so then we'll pick from these carrots. Well, okay, we don't work at that farm anymore, and they didn't have a good yield, so we're going to have to figure out another type of carrot that we're going to have to get to you. Okay, so there's a lot of issues and things that happen on at even this level where you may not even be getting the product that you're asking for because they just don't have it. If you remember, there was a period of time in the last 3 years where there was an avocado shortage, and avocados are nowhere to be found. Well, a lot of our dishes had avocado in it. So what do you do? Like, if the dish has avocado in it, how do you deliver on that promise? As a consumer, I don't care there's an avocado shortage. I want that dish. And so how do you come up with ways to get around that? Now, receiving is actually really funny. So when you work with some of these aggregators, they have tons of customers. And what they're doing is saying, okay, you wanted 600 pounds of carrots, you wanted, 50 pounds of beef, whatever it is, and then they deliver it to your kitchen, you receive it, and you're like, whoa, wait a minute, these are potatoes, these aren't carrots. Or worse yet, it's dog food, and it's not even something you can use, which has actually happened to us before. And so they'll ship you the wrong stuff. And you're like, whoa, like my plan today was to make all of these meals this way with these ingredients, and now you just screwed me over because I don't even have the stuff I need to make it. When you're making really fresh food, each delivery is super important. And so mistakes like that have huge implications for delivering on the customer promise. So that's a whole host of issues with receiving. Prep is actually related more to labor. So if you think about, there's tons of people that will be working in your kitchen doing all the prep work to make these dishes. So they may be chopping carrots, they may be butchering up meat, they may be grinding different things, making sauces. This is all hand done. It's not hand done everywhere, but a lot of these kitchens do make things by hand, and that's why they make such delicious food. But when you depend on a large labor force to do a lot of that work and they don't show up, how do you make the food? So these are the kinds of issues that we face, especially in these next three, prep, cook, and assemble, where you really depend on those people coming to work every day. When you're making huge volumes of food, it's really important to make sure that they're happy, but that you have a backup plan if they don't end up showing up to work. And if you think about the environment that these people are working in order to keep this food really fresh, you have to work in a refrigerated environment. So imagine hiring somebody who's going to be working chopping carrots all day long, but you're going to be in the cold. So you can imagine it's a little hard sometimes to find people who want to do that for years and years and years. And that's why you kind of see that being an issue. Cook is sort of an interesting area where lots of things can go wrong, but primarily it's been on burning things. So there's been, vats of chicken that we've had to throw away because somebody cooked it too far than what it's supposed to be. So that could be a huge cost for the company, not the customers, because we would never pass down that onto the customer. But if you think about the margins in the food business, they're not really huge. And so any sort of food waste in this process is really expensive for companies to handle. And then the last piece is assembly. So if you guys remember that I Love Lucy video where they're showing the conveyor belt and she's trying to wrap like chocolate, this is reality here in assembly. I've actually been to several kitchens, not just Snap Kitchen, where they do this, and they have basically a conveyor belt, several conveyor belts. And there will be one person at each station where they will be assembling parts of the meal. So if you think about the salmon dish, imagine a container, somebody puts, the carrots on the side, somebody puts the salmon, making sure they're weighing it for each one, because each one needs to be consistent, putting the lime there, putting the little cilantro on top, but again, weighing everything along the way and doing this all day long, this same dish. And then you package it up. And packaging is not fun. I actually had to do that for half a day. Makes you really appreciate your job. But basically, hand putting on the lid, putting a label on it, making sure it's all lined up, and then putting expiration dates on there. It's a pretty time-intensive job, and you would think, oh, well, you should just have a machine do that. It's not as easy as you think. Having a machine put a label on a package that may be different sizes, because you're selling different sizes. Some of them you're selling in round bowls. Some of them you're selling in rectangular containers. And so there isn't one machine that fits all, and they're really expensive. So unless you're going to make a huge investment around label wrapping machines, you still have to do all the manual labor of putting the food in the container and putting the lid on it, and then doing quality checking as well. So that's just one part of the journey. All right, so this is the second part. So once the food is put into the containers, they'll get stacked up, and each dish will be split, what we're calling split in the warehouse, to all the different locations that you want to ship this out to. So this is where the demand planning comes into play. You'll basically get to see, okay, this store asked for 20 of this salmon dish, so we got to make sure there's 20 going to that store. This other store wanted 40, so let's make sure there's 40. Sometimes it's manually counted. Sometimes they have a system on how they count it. But you can imagine there's a ton of issues where I put the wrong number at the wrong store. That is a possibility. Or I dropped it. And there's a lot of drop points along this way. You'd be surprised how many times you've had to throw away meals because they've been dropped on the floor, because nobody wants to buy something that looks like it's been dropped on the floor. So one of the things that happens in a lot of these kitchens and warehouses is how many hand touches does it undergo. And this happens in the grocery world too. You want to minimize it as much as possible, not just from a labor perspective, but from a quality perspective. If there's too many handling of that container, it's inherently going to get messed up along the way. So all the food gets wrapped up on these pallets. They get put on these trucks. And this is a lot of what you cannot control. So what you're basically trying to do is make sure you get into this truck on a very specific time so that it can go to the city that it needs to go to. Now, there's nothing that you can change about the distance between two cities. It's always going to take X number of hours to drive from one city to another. The other thing you can't control is traffic. Hurricanes, which we had one, a couple years ago. Those are all things that will prevent this truck of an entire day's worth of food that could be sold at one of those stores could get stuck along the way, and those customers coming into those stores may not see anything to buy because this truck never made it to that city. So there's a lot of considerations here. Also, depending on if you own the trucks or not, that could also be a factor. So labor comes into factor as well here, because you may contract out this part of your business to a third-party company, and they don't drive after a certain number of hours. They will only drive X number of hours, and then you're done. So you've got to figure out what is the optimal route to go from my kitchen to those stores and back in the time allotted for that driver to basically call it a day, because there's laws around that. You can't change it. So this is a pretty big component. And there's a lot of sort of science that goes around on logistics and distribution and how the routing should happen and how it should be dropped off at all of these locations. So similarly, where you could split the inventory you just created to the wrong locations at this point, then this driver, who may not even work for your company, could actually be delivering the wrong order to the wrong store. So in the case of Snap Kitchen where I worked, in some cases we would actually pack full meals at the kitchen before we would actually put it at the store location. So if you ordered from a specific store, your order would not go to that store or go to another store. We'd have to figure out some way in the middle of the day to get your order from this store to that store, because that's where you were going to go pick it up. So especially, and another opportunity, this thing could completely fall over. And now you've got a whole pallet of food, and I'm telling you this because this has happened. This whole pallet of food is now something you can no longer sell. So there's a lot of issues with that. Now we're at the actual stores. Getting in between the stores could also be tricky. Again, routing and traffic against all of these stores and then dropping them off at the wrong location. And then the last piece of the journey, is getting it to your home. So when it comes off of the truck, the people that work in the stores will take the food and put it onto the shelves. So now you've got customers who are coming in to buy the food off the shelves, then you've got customers placing orders online. Here's another opportunity for food to fall on the floor. And what's even more crazy is there's a lot of stuff going on in a store that needs to be on in order for the food to be safe for you to consume. So one of them is the cooler. There's a cooler in each location, which is just like a refrigerator that's open where you pick out the food. Believe it or not, if the electricity goes out, that refrigerator also goes out, which happens a lot. More than you might think. These coolers are on all day long because they want to keep the food fresh. So what do you do when that cooler goes out of business and now you've got all this food that will spoil within the next hour or two? The other thing is the external factors around this store. So crazy enough, and I don't know if you guys read this story or not, but we actually had a car fall from a parking garage and crash into the roof of one of our stores. So now that store is out of commission, but customers were still expecting to pick up their food from this location or get it delivered from this store. So what do you do in that situation, right? I mean, that store is just out of commission. And then construction. There's construction going on around your store all the time. And that actually goes back to my earlier point around demand planning. If you don't know that construction is going to be happening a week from now, 2 weeks from now, you've just demand forecasted for a period of time that is completely different than any other sales time that you had ever planned for prior. And so you might be ordering way more food than was going to be sold because there's construction going on around that store. The last point is this is another labor area as well. People work in those stores. If they don't show up to work, those doors don't open and nobody can go in there and get the food out, even if they tried. And so that's also another place to making sure you have backup to be able to give the food there. Now, the last mile delivery is probably the most important part because this is literally the last step before it gets to a person's home. And when you don't, in most cases, most companies do not own this part of their process. They rely on Uber, they rely on Favor, they rely on lots of different DoorDash. They all have these programs where companies like Snap Kitchen are able to use their fleet to service delivering their food through their e-commerce application. So when you're using lots of these partners don't work for your company. They're actually contractors of the company that you're working with. So they're not even permanent employees of those companies. And the criteria in which they hire these people is very different. The type of service that you get is hit or miss. But this is the front facing of your company to that person who just ordered food. They don't always know that this isn't the same person that works for that company or not. And so they might think that the reason that this food is disheveled or it didn't come on time is because of this driver, but they think that driver works for your company. And so this one is a really hard thing to tackle. And then if you think about rain and traffic and all of those other conditions, there were times where these companies will not operate because they don't want to endanger their drivers because of the weather. But that means your customers still don't get their food, and they were expecting to get it. And so that's another area that you have to think about, is how do you fulfill on that. One more point on the store is these stores can close at random times due to maintenance, which is another issue if you're planning on picking up your order from that location. So if it makes it to your house in a great condition, in the condition that you're expecting, and we got you what you wanted, that was the journey that it took to get there. So you can imagine how many touch points and how many failures are in this journey in order for you to get that consistent experience every time. So does it make sense maybe why sometimes your food isn't exactly the way you expected when you get it? Maybe? Yeah? All right. All right, so the key to this is risk mitigation is the key to success. We spent a lot of time at the company that I was at and the company that I'm at now is figuring out what are all the different things that could go wrong at each point of the process so that we have a backup plan on how to mitigate and make sure that the customer never, ever feels that pain. So hopefully you took away from this that it's really hard when a lot of the factors are out of your control. When you're dealing with product, where your product is a technology, a lot of those factors are within your control. But in the example I just gave you, it's clear like almost half of it's not in your control. The technology part is a really small piece of it. Like I said, we spend a lot of the time identifying what those external factors are. And you'd be surprised how many of us fall back on manual processes, and our employee base actually stepping up when asked to deliver on the customer promise. And that's what I really love working with these companies, is that the employee talent pool and the people that really want to make sure that there's no crying babies and that you're getting the food that you want, it's really important to them, and they take it very seriously. So the fact that many of these people in those situations where I just described will roll up their sleeves and start chopping carrots, will roll up their sleeves, package the food, will roll up their sleeves and drive the food to your house, and you may not even realize it. And just to make sure that you never feel the pain that we went through of getting that food to you. And you've probably heard this expression before, but I always like to say it because this is really important when it comes to the food service industry, but it is 1,000 little things that make up a great experience. And retention is a really huge thing in this business, especially when the margins are so small. It's important for us to get customers to come back to us over and over again. And one bad experience could really make you not ever come back again, especially if you get sick. And so that's why food safety and all of that is really important throughout this whole process as well. As I mentioned in the kitchen, they're working in the cold, but actually the whole entire process, the food is pretty much cold the whole entire way, just to make sure that you don't get sick from it. So there you go. Bon appetit.
Got it. Why don't we take some questions? I've got loads. I've got a mic here, so if you got a question, just raise your hand. I'll run a mic over to you.
How do you use technology in that chain? How do you use technology to identify where there are when something goes wrong? Do you use technology during the process to understand that something went wrong, or you find out later on?
Yeah, I mean, it depends. We try and put as much instrumentation as possible to alert us. In that last mile delivery example, we were connecting with these services through APIs. So we would build in, thresholds. We would know when the driver left our store to go drop it off. Or if the delivery order never got picked up, we would have something that would say, hey, this is like 15 minutes late or 20 minutes late. And that's when we would pick up the phone and call the store and say, hey, did somebody not come pick it up? We'll dispatch another driver. So there's that's how we did some of the risk mitigation, is where it was possible, we would put in alerting mechanisms. And we would hopefully never get an issue where we would hear it from the customer. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
Hi. So with what you talked about in all the places that things can go wrong, like what would you say is like the ratio to like meals that get delivered to like what you originally started with, like how many meals that would have potentially made, like how much waste or loss is there?
Yeah, I mean, it varies depending on the dish, especially if it's a newer dish. It's something that, you know, the team's not used to making, and so they don't have that the muscle memory of repetition of the same movements over and over again. So like for a newer dish, you know, it's probably on like a 20% waste or so. But for a more established dish, you know, it should be under 5%. Yeah.
It's just interesting because it's not something I would have thought about. Like if I'm like, oh, wow, I'm getting this meal. It's like $10. It's so expensive. But it's also like there's so much waste that happens that's probably built in too.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that's one of the, you know, you talk about KPIs and, you know, what do you always look at when you look at a SaaS product and those metrics? In the food business, there's a lot of metrics like that. Like what is our food waste? What is our shrink? What is our labor costs? All of those things are things we have to monitor, you know, on a daily basis. Yeah.
And sorry, just to also add on, do you mind talking like what, as a product manager in this space, like what is like I don't know if like a day-to-day sounds like an interview question, but
yeah,
I'm just curious.
It's crazy.
It's different. Yeah.
You go to stores. No. Well, I'll tell you one thing that's different is orientation. You know, it's really important at a lot of these companies to feel what it's like to be in other roles within the company, particularly more operational roles. So, you know, when I started out at Snap Kitchen, we worked in the stores. We talked to customers. I told you I assembled those packages and put the labels on. We went into the kitchens and we actually helped them make meals, which probably was a food safety violation. But you know, who cares about that? Yeah, so it was really having empathy for the operational side of the business. I think from the technical side, it's very similar to what you know you would be doing in roles, building out a new technology. We did user research, we did customer interviews. The personas are quite broad in terms of the types of people you want to cater to, and we had like categories like food for fuel, people who didn't really care about how things tasted, they were just using food for energy, and then there were like more foodie people who wanted us to be more in food trend. So it was like, how do you cater to all of these different types of personas? And then, you know, demographics of users as well. So I would say that one is probably more similar, but when you do a rollout, it's a much bigger deal. When you do like a product launch with a technology company, typically you'll talk to like finance, sales, marketing, you know, inside sales if that's part of your thing, or customer care. When you're doing something like this, you also have to involve all your store people. And doing it over the phone or over video conference doesn't always work, especially when they've never been exposed to this environment before. You know, Snap Kitchen is a good example of a company that didn't have any digital solution in place. And so this was a whole new line of business that nobody in the stores was really familiar with. And so we spent a lot of time going from city to city to explain, you know, what was the reasoning behind why we're doing this? Why is this important to the company in general? Why is this important to your store? How are you bought into this process? And then that's a continual conversation that we have. And we actually use Slack a lot to get feedback from our stores on how things are going and what are people saying about the app or the online experience. And just so we would have all of those inputs real time and be able to react to them. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about building brand loyalty. So something I'm interested is, you know, a couple of years ago it was like Blue Apron versus HelloFresh and a bunch of that. And while Snap Kitchen's a little bit different, it could almost be like a perfect substitute, as well as like the HEB Simple Meals. So how do you build brand loyalty amongst your customers?
Well, one is delivering on the expectation, which I just talked about. Like if you never have their dish that they're looking for, or it never tastes good, like those are the things, like their quality. I mean, if the food isn't good for them and doesn't work for them, then they're never going to come back. So that, first and foremost, has to be key. I think the other things that we learned a lot, we looked at a lot of meal kit companies. That was a very big, market that was booming when I first joined Snap Kitchen. And one of the things that we started to look at was some of the feedback that people were posting on their Facebook sites and their websites. And what we learned is that waste was a really big issue. And having boxes and all this packaging and stuff that comes along with it was a problem for a lot of people, and they just felt bad that they were taking this convenience but at a huge cost. And so we actually looked at our packaging in that way. And the benefit of us actually being local to our consumer base was very much in our hands, or very much beneficial to us. And we looked at the containers that we were, in fact, now if you go into a Snap Kitchen, all of the containers are compostable. And they weren't before. And so we took it all the way down to like the bags and the reusability of everything. And that was, I think, how we started to build some of that, more of that brand trust. I also think the story on like how the company was founded is really important to a lot of consumers, and what they're doing to give back to the community. And that's one of the things I'm really proud about working at Snap Kitchen, but even more so at HEB. We gave all the food to food banks. That was really important, and HEB does the same thing. HEB is on the first to natural disaster that happens in the state of Texas. Those are the things that, they don't talk a whole lot about, but that's why there's such a huge cult, almost like feeling of love for those brands. Yeah.
Sushma, you've given us like 1,001 reasons not to go into the food business. Like I feel like next time I get a prepared meal, I'll feel like it's a near miracle that it actually arrived. And yet like people do found food companies, and some of them are wildly successful. Like I'm just interested like in your personal observations, like what kind of people like opt into founding or running a business like this, and like what makes them successful? I mean, just your opinion based on what you've seen.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the companies that are looking for that greater good. One of the companies that we looked at a lot, and I personally, I'm really fascinated by, is Sweetgreens. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that brand. They're not in Texas, unfortunately, but I think they'll be coming to Austin soon. But one of the things that they stand for is community, and making people understand ingredients that you would never even think about consuming. Like they literally go out and look for leaves that you would never even think about eating, but is super nutritious for you, and is creating a lot of waste in the world, and we could be using it in one of our dishes. They're using it as a platform to educate their consumer, and I think that's what's really cool about that brand, and they're doing things for the community where I think Blue Apron was good in concept. I think they were trying to solve for something, but they didn't really evolve from it as quickly. They didn't really listen to, I think, their customers the way that good product managers and good businesses run. Everybody, hands down, if you've ever tried a Blue Apron meal kit, it takes a heck of a long time to create those meals. But then if you try plated, it actually is not as long. It's the same concept. But it's not as bad, right? And same with some of the other meal kit services out there. So why were those companies able to succeed, whereas like the initial, entrant into that market didn't? And I think it's really about listening to that customer and reacting to what are the things that they're talking about.
So while I got the mic, I got one more. So actually, it's a good segue. Like in what you talked about, you didn't talk about the initial, the customer discovery and the research and development. You focused a lot on the operational side. Like, what does the part before that look like? So you mentioned new dishes. Like, how do they decide what new dishes they're going to build? Like, what does that look like in a business that's so different than software?
Yeah, it's fun. That is like the one part that I love about working at a food company. It's different at HEB versus Snap Kitchen. Snap Kitchen, they were really looking at what was on trend. They would listen to a lot of customer feedback on like, hey, I really wish you would make more dishes like this. Looking at sales. So there's a lot of data input that comes into that. But what was really fascinating is we would have chefs that would come up with these dishes, and then a registered dietitian would come in and say, nope, 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 and try and make it sort of a healthier version, but still stay true to like the intent of the dish. And then we get to be taste testers in the office. So, we're sort of like the first round of feedback for the chefs on these dishes. And then similar to software, we'll do like a small test out in the market. We'll make a small batch. We'll sell it on a shelf. Say these are, new dishes if you want to try them. Sometimes we'll give them away for free. And get their feedback. And usually if we give it away for free, they'll fill out a survey card. But that's how we would usually do it. And it, taste is really hard. So getting as many different viewpoints in that test panel is what makes it or breaks it sometimes. But we don't always get it right. And that's where we have to be really nimble. We have to really figure out, okay, do we want to give this dish another chance for another couple weeks? Or do we want to pull it off the shelf and put something else on there? Or was this dish not really us? Was it not part of our concept? Does it not fit into like the menu of offering that we want to sell? And HEB is very similar. It's looking at data. It's figuring out, what are people into these days? If you go into an HEB today, you'll see a lot of poke bowls. It's because everybody loves to eat poke bowls. And so it's like, how do you kind of keep a pulse on that and make sure that there's enough dishes that are approachable? That is probably one of the biggest learnings is people don't want to try this new fancy dish from a company they don't really know. It's interesting how many people will gravitate towards turkey bolognese or a burger. And that's sort of their test to see if this is the place they want to continue to eat. And so a lot of those dishes and those staples are really important for the company to get them to come back and try out their more on-trend dishes. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay.
What was the most stressful experience that you ever had working in the supply chain? Like,
yeah,
the hardest thing that you had to deal with in a single day?
So I think it was, we came out with a meal subscription service. I don't know if you are familiar with it, but it's basically a meal plan based on a lifestyle. So if you, decided to eat keto or Whole30, you could basically opt into a 3, 5, or 7 day meal plan. So, it was fine in D&D when we would have customers just place an order and it's usually for that day or the next day. But think about customers who are on a recurring basis ordering different things and can change it at the last minute. We gave them ultimate flexibility, probably more than we needed to, but we wanted to make sure it was a compelling offering. And so one of our stores would close or the hurricane came. And how do you tell somebody who placed an order 5 days ago that they can't get their food now? They just don't get it. They're like, I just gave you all this lead time. And so we went through a lot of challenges in figuring out how are we going to make sure that our kitchens know that this is how much we need to ship to this store for an order that was placed 3 days ago. And so just all of the math and stuff involved in making sure everybody had the right numbers across the board. So launching that product, we did a really good job in launching it, but then we had so many fast follow learns it was really stressful to make sure that we had keep customers staying on the program, week after week.
So you mentioned that the example of poke bowls at HEB, testing that out because everyone's into poke bowls. And I remember I used Snap Kitchen at the Triangle, and I remember there was a week that they were trying to do poke bowls, and they were like, "Oh, it didn't do well. We're not going to do it anymore." How often do you guys iterate on new products or testing new dishes?
Yeah, every business is a little bit different. It depends on what their R&D and process life cycle is for making those dishes. What we try and do is do it in smaller batches. So those are typically a much tighter cycle. And usually, if I remember correctly, it's probably about a month of time. But then when we graduate that and we say, okay, that dish is now going to go to all of our locations, it probably takes a good 8 to 10 weeks to get it into the cycle, because now you've got to procure items at scale. You have to make sure the food costs line up. You have to teach people how to make this dish. There's a lot of things that go on into not just making the dish, but making sure it's a consistent experience for every single customer, every time you make it. Yeah. I wish it was faster.
All right, tell us about crime fighting with a BlackBerry.
Oh, gosh. Okay. If you Google really hard, you can see my silly video where I tell this story. So this was a long time ago because I had a BlackBerry. And not many people have BlackBerries these days. So anyways, I was on the east side and I locked my purse in my car. Of course, why wouldn't you do that? And I went for a run. I came back and the window of my car was smashed and my purse was gone. And not just mine, the car next to mine also had smashed in the window and their wallet was gone. So, most people would be like, oh, I guess, that's a loss. Not me. I was not going to have it. I was not going to have to go get a new driver's license. So I went home, I went home with my broken window, went into my house. I don't even know how I got in, but got on my computer, called I must have done it through my computer. No, I went to work and because I didn't have a phone. And I took my computer and I called the cell phone company and I was like, hey, do you guys have something where I can figure out where my phone is? This was before the Find My iPhone days. And so they were like, well, we have this thing where you can find your kids online. So if they have cell phones, you can log in and find out where they are. I was like, okay, that sounds like a great idea. How do I get access to that? So they're like, oh, it's actually a free trial, so you could just sign up. So I signed up, and I think the map that this thing used was MapQuest. It was rudimentary. And so what you do is you just log in, it knows who you are, your phone number, and you ping it. And it's like that triangulation tower pinging system. So your phone has to be on. Thank God mine was. And it just keeps pinging it, and then it'll ping back what the location is. Well, since it was a really bad map, I would look at that, and then I would open up Google Maps, and I would try and figure out where it was triangulating. And then I called the police. I called the APD, and I said, I think I know where my stuff is. Do you guys want to go and get it for me? And they're like, ma'am, we're a little bit busy right now, but we'll call you back. I didn't think that they were going to call me back. They called me back. It must have been a slow crime day. So they called me back, and they're like, okay, we're ready now. Where is it? And I was like, okay, well, I think they're here, so maybe you guys should drive over there. And then they moved, and I was like, no, they're on the move. And so it was I felt like I was in one of those crime, TV shows, and I was the command center, and they were asking me, and then I was thinking, don't they have people that do this in their police department? But I guess not. So I was on the phone with them, and they're like, okay, we're going to call your phone right now, and we think we've located it. And they did. It was in the back seat of this car that was parked in front of this convenience store, which is where I told them to go. And so not only did they find my stuff, they also found all the other cars they broke into that day. So that was really exciting. I didn't get everything back that I had in there, but I got my BlackBerry back, and I got my my cards and stuff back. So, and then the news found out, and they interviewed me and made me do silly stuff. So to reenact the moment. So, anyways,
all right,
I was really proud of that moment.
Sushma, that is pretty awesome, and so is your talk. Thank you very, very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Take care.
That was fun.
All right, guys, we are almost done, but I want to give people the opportunity real quickly for shout-outs. So, again, if you got anything you think might be relevant to the group, come on up. If you're hiring, you got some news, Sushma, you too are welcome to participate. So
I'll just do the first one. We're hiring at HEB. So if you're excited about working in food tech, we have tons of product management, design, engineering openings at our company.
Cool. Thank you very much. Anybody else? Come on up. Yeah. Here you go. Thanks.
How you doing? I'm Adrian. I'm at a 10-person startup. I'm a CTO. I'm a product-focused CTO. We're about 10. Oh, hey! I didn't see you in here. We're a 10-person startup. We are bottlenecked at product design and product management. So looking for either or, maybe even a hybrid. That'd be great.
10 seconds, what do you do?
SaaS product for concert organizers. So kind of like event management for people that throw concerts professionally.
Cool.
Prism.fm.
Thank you very much. Anybody else? All right, well, thank you very much. I think we're all going to be hanging around for a bit. I think we got more drinks, more food. Really enjoyed having everyone here tonight. Thank you very much. Hope to see you next month. Take care. Bye.